Gonna get going with our program here tonight. So again, State of the Snowpack, non-for-profit. You can enter the raffle throughout the evening, and after the final presentation, we'll give away some sweet prizes for sure. So just as we get going here, I want to start with something really, I'll start with the heavy. And on Monday, just outside of Golden, skier lost their life in an avalanche on Capristo Mountain. This is from the Min and just a news report. And this avalanche was arguably a 1.5 that, because of the consequence of the terrain, made it a size 2. And, you know, when these incidents happen, this was the first avalanche fatality this year, and or this season, I believe. And it's always hard to digest, especially doing what we do. So just as we get going, I just wanted everybody just to take a quick moment and think about this person's family, their friends, the first responders that deal with these situations, because it's incredibly difficult, and our community in a whole. And, you know, take pause, and the consequence of doing what we love to do sometimes is very real, and it's really hard, and it's really sad. And it's hard when we hear these things, you know, like we can relate, many of us in the room can relate to personal experience. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, and our deepest condolences to the person's family. And, you know, it's an awful thing. So we do our land acknowledgement every single time. Acknowledge that we're gathered on the traditional and ancestral unceded lands of the Snakes, Silk, and Tanaha peoples. And we feel privileged and grateful to be here and honor the ongoing presence of the Snakes on this land. We are mindful of how we carry ourselves today so as to demonstrate our intentions to honor this land, water, and all beings. And the typical disclaimer, important, but the information that I or we present is my own or our own observations and the best of my or our ability. And this presentation does not replace actual avalanche training. Sign up to an AST CAA course this winter, and what you do with the information that I or we present is your responsibility. Use it responsibly. So what is State of the Snowpack? Community conversations, saving lives in the backcountry. This is, you know, having people gather here and creating this community and everybody here to learn and help keep themselves safer. It's really, really important, and, you know, like, we're doing our best to foster that. So our mission: decrease backcountry avalanche incidents, casualties, and rescues through the sharing of detailed community-specific snowpack analysis. Bridge the gap between AvCan's regional forecast and local knowledge shared in the InfoX by guides and avalanche professionals, we want to give as local as it gets snowpack analysis in as clear and simple terms as possible. And we want to share information gathered from our local guiding and forecasting communities, allowing locals to make the most informed decisions in the backcountry. So the goal is for all of us to make it home safe every single time we go out into the mountains and have hopefully a really beautiful tour. So visit our website. Snowpack updates, if we give them on Instagram or online, they're on their event schedules. How to get involved, was redone, and it's a pretty great website. So want a big thank you to Morgan. So Morgan Dinsdale who'd love to be here. She's off. She works outside of Whistler now. And just thank you, Morgan, for bringing State of the Snowpack to, we have 4 chapters now in Nelson, Roslyn, Fernie, and Revelstoke. This thing is building up thanks to Morgan's vision. She borrowed the idea. She lived in Jackson Hole, and they used to do an event similar to this, and so she wanted to bring this to Nelson, and all of a sudden we're in 4 different communities, and it's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of, and really feel honored to be here and grateful for what Morgan has, the brainchild that she started. Our event and contributor team, so Judson Wright, Kootenay Backcountry Guides, myself, lead forecaster, or one of the senior forecasters at Whitewater, Kath, who is a board member and our organizer, and we couldn't do it without her. She's amazing, sitting right here. Shane, who's our live stream producer, just at the back, always does an amazing job, so when people can't be here, they can tune in online. We have Mike Wigley, who's a contributor for us, Julianne Chapman from She Shreds Mountain Adventures. She's been doing some great video updates and brings a nice sled component to what we do. Wendy, who's Avalanche forecaster and a forecaster with AvCan. And tonight she's going to be doing the Snowpack update for us, and she's amazing. And Kyle Gorenko, who's out guiding at White Grizzly right now, and he's been hosting for us for a couple events, and he does an amazing job as well. So I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. They help us out a lot. Hub, Northern Bridge Insurance, Rainey, and Mountain Medical Consultants. And thank you to our partners. Kootenay Backcountry Guides, the Royal for hosting us for all these events, Whitewater Ski Resort, and She Shreds Mountain Adventures. And so if anybody feels inspired, you can get involved. You can donate. Like I say, the raffle tickets that if you're entering, or any amount, if you have extra to help us out, makes a big difference. Support our local Snowpack field and events team. Sponsorship available. Support the cause of bringing State of the Snowpack to every ski town across BC would be a really amazing thing to have happen, and become a key member of the backcountry community or a contributor. And our regions are huge. And the more contributors from each pocket of BC, the better we can relay those snowpack conditions, so everybody gets to hear the same awesome information, hopefully. So again, the raffle tickets, this was up earlier, and that helps us out a lot. And tonight, so I'm going to be doing the first presentation. It's a bit of a role reversal. Normally, we do the presentation so the snowpack is first and then the guest presenter is after. But the nature of my presentation, I really want to present first, because I think it's going to give you some insights into looking at the forecast and maybe looking at certain things in a slightly different way. And then Wendy, CA Level 2 Pro member, forecaster for Whitewater and for AvCan, is going to come up and give our actual snowpack update and let us know kind of what's in the cards in the coming storm here, which could be interesting. So this evening's topics, I'm going to go through some aspect and elevation, some danger ratings, some avalanche problems, weather and resources. And Wendy's going to go through our snowpack averages, our weather, notable layers, the forecast, any recent avalanche activity that we've seen out there, and try to look into the crystal ball and see what's coming down, hopefully white from the heavens this weekend. So let's get going with my presentation. So I want to I've been asked so many questions as I've been doing this, and oftentimes we finish and everybody can come up, and and I get people who aren't, don't want to ask in front of a group of people, might think that their question is a little bit, their question is only pertains to them or might not be the most knowledgeable thing. And I started thinking, I'm like, wow, a lot of these questions that people ask me are really good information that I think a lot of people would benefit from hearing. So that's what inspired me to put this presentation together. So Kath was talking, so if people have questions as I'm moving through this, it would be pretty awesome if you put up your hand and ask me a question as we're going through. And anybody who does might get a free little prize here from the prize bucket in front of me. So, trying to inspire you. There we go, the dry mouth. So there aren't any stupid questions, that's a term, we've heard it all before, and wherever you are in your Avalanche and Snowpack knowledge, it's really paramount to be curious. When you're figuring out snow, when you're asking questions of yourself, of what's happening around you, that's how you're going to learn. And that knowledge is critical to help you make decisions that might save your own life or save somebody else's life when you're out there. So it's a great idea to really, really be curious. And I was asking questions. We have a new GM, Mike Rubenstein, up at Whitewater. A long time working in the Avalanche field, super knowledgeable, and it's really nice for me to go in and bounce some ideas off him. And him and David Michael, the outdoor ops manager, were talking, and Dave kept saying, he's like, man, you're such a great teacher. And Mike kept saying, I'm not a teacher, I'm a lifelong student. And he said it a couple times, and I'm like, we all know, but hearing it from somebody like that makes me really, really appreciate the fact that none of us know it all. And we're all just learning the best we can. And, he's a lifelong student. You ask people who've been in the field 20 years longer than him, they're a lifelong student. I'm a lifelong student. We're all lifelong students. Wherever it is that you're landing, whether you're going to work as a professional, whether you're just going to be going and doing amazing ski tours, you are a student of what's happening out there because it's really, really important. So take that to heart and always know that, asking those questions and being curious is what's going to further your knowledge, and it's going to make a significant difference for you. So I want to start with something that might sound simple, but I want everybody on the count of 3 to point to north. 1, 2, 3. How did we do? Seems easy, right? Where's north? You're traveling through the mountains, and it's a beautiful sunny day. You could see the sun in the sky. You could see where the shadows are. Hey, I know where north is. All of a sudden it gets cloudy, it clags in. You're standing in a ping pong ball. And where's north? And I can't emphasize how critical it is to know your aspect. And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it's not. But if you always know where north is, you can orient yourself to your aspects really, really effectively. So when I'm out, I'm always looking. I have landmarks, and as I'm traveling through the mountains, I'm constantly looking, so I know when I'm traveling, I know what aspect I'm on because I know where north is. I'm a little bit old school. I know we have that, you have a compass on your phone, right? But we lean a lot on technology now. We have all these nifty mapping apps. You can kind of follow yourself along and track your distance. But technology can fail out there, and I always carry a compass. And carrying a compass has a clinometer on it. And if things go sideways, it's an easy thing. I always carry in my bag. I can pull it out, and I can always try to navigate. So when your knowledge of terrain, as you're increasing, when you're traveling, you can orient yourself to where north is, and then you can always, it really makes a significant difference to know if you're wrapping around a little bit east, because as we'll be talking about, sometimes avalanche problems exist on north, true north aspects, only on souths or southwest where it's more solar. You know, we have problems that are directly on east, and if you don't know how to orient yourself to that and what aspect you're on, it can be a real struggle to find out from the forecast, oh, we have a surface hoar problem, tree line north. So you better know what tree line north is if that's the problem that you're dealing with. So take that into account, put this into practice. As you're traveling around out there, always just keep it in the back of your mind and do a self-check. I'm like, where is north and what aspect am I on right now? Because it makes a really significant difference. So north-facing terrain, deeper and colder, typically in our region, more leeward, so the snow blows over the ridges from the southwest or south and then kind of loads onto northerly aspects, and it's a lot more prone to surface hoar and storm instabilities than maybe some other aspects are, but that's what you oftentimes can find on a north-facing aspect. South-facing terrain tends to be much shallower, you know. The terrain itself is much more plainer. It can be a lot smoother, like in the whitewater drainage. Look at aspects like Whale's Back, look at our goats terrain, you know, like wide open. And souths can be, you know, kind of average skiing a lot of the time, but when a south face turns on, it's about as good as it gets because usually there's not much in your way, there's not as many trees or whatever. It can be wide open and just ski really, really beautifully. That's what we have here in the Kootenays. And generally it's a windward, it's a fetch where the snow comes from for leeward slopes, and quite prone to, you know, melt freeze crusts and for some faceting on crusts. And now elevation. So how many people here feel confident in recognizing if you're an alpine, tree line, or below tree line terrain? In the Kootenays, it's a different animal in that we don't really have as much true alpine. At Whitewater, kind of the upper from, if people know Whitewater, from the West Weimer up to the top of the peak is kind of how we would define our alpine. It's a very alpine style feature. Versus tree line, we have a lot of tree line and funneling into below tree line down towards the base. But between below tree line and your tree line elevations, it can be a real gray area. And again, oftentimes there can be a problem. I'm going to give a very specific and serious example here in a minute. But you can be in a tree line where there's a problem and the hazard is high, and below tree line it doesn't exist. Or in the alpine where there's a problem and at tree line it doesn't exist. So knowing where those elevation bands are is critical. So aspect, elevation. So our alpine terrain and treeless area, upper reaches of the mountains. So treeless is the big indicator. More snow, winds are stronger, the sun's rays are the most intense, terrain irregularities, ridges, bowls, gullies, exposed to the wind and sun, it's sticking up there, right? Promoting the creation of unstable snow. this is where typically the most avalanches occur. I'm taking this straight from Avi Savvy on the AvCan's website, and we'll go back towards that, but amazing resource. So this is an example of an avalanche in the Alpine. Had this up earlier, but you can tell when you're looking at this, you know, you're not seeing a lot of trees. And when I say we're not true Alpine, the face of Weimer Peak, there's a little tree that's growing right on top of Weimer Peak. I don't know how many people have been up there in the summer, but they are there. And it's, you know, so our Alpine is a little bit different. What we would consider Alpine compared to the Rockies, where you have a lot of Alpine, because those peaks are so much higher, and it's different. You have a lot more very well-defined bands maybe in the Rockies that are easier to discern than we do here. So for us, this is very typical of what we would call our Alpine, and just remember the absence of trees. But this was an avalanche that occurred last year. You can see the shot. It was 15 or 12.5 pound bag of ammo that we threw out of a helicopter that caused this thing, and it's a big avalanche. It's a size 3 in the Alpine. Tree line elevation. So this is, I think, this kind of our trickiest elevation here in the Kootenays, because you're kind of when you're transitioning. So you can see this picture, you know, beautiful ridge. This is heading back over. Whitewater's down over here. This would be Coor's Claw, if anybody knows that line, just on the other side of those trees. It's a transition zone. Trees are smaller and less dense, yet there's more vegetation than the Alpine. You don't get the protective effects of the forest, but you also don't get the full brunt of the elements coming at it in the Alpine like it does. Accidents happen at tree line almost as often as in the Alpine, and there's enough wind at tree line to build slabs, and the sparse trees can make things worse by actually acting like little snow fences. You know, it loads in kind of different ways because it's not just all stripped away and loaded in maybe slightly more obvious spots. And it's complex, and the variety of factors make it easy to underestimate the hazards that exist, but the hazards are significant. So here's an example of an avalanche at tree line. I was out sledding, and we ended up taking this, but you can see significant, you can see how sparse it is, and it's, this is, you know, that's a pretty serious, probably size 2 avalanche there, and with some significant consequence. The other thing that makes it consequential is we have more, our fatalities in Canada and the US are typically far more trauma related, especially in BC, because a lot of skiing happens at tree line and into below tree line. So when avalanches occur, there's trauma versus asphyxiation, which is far more common in Europe, where people are skiing in the Alps. Avalanches happen high. There isn't that trauma, and so people get buried, and if they're not dug out on time, they asphyxiate, right? So, you know, like people talk about the merits of airbags. I believe airbags are a really, really good tool. Tree line elevations, you know, people have said, well, maybe if you're on top and you're hitting trees, but I still think it's better to be on top of the snow than being underneath it. But a lot of what we have in the Kootenays and a lot of where you're touring, if you're touring here, you go north of us, we get into some bigger alpine terrain, but we ski a lot of tree line features, and it's something to be very aware to know where you are and what's happening with that. Below tree line, valley bottom and up the mountainside to where the forest begins to thin out. So we're talking denser trees here. For us, our tree line is going to be maybe 1,900 to 2,000 meters. Below that, we're below tree line. Avalanches are less likely below tree line because we don't have open areas that load, like you need a wide area, but they're, you can still have very, very significant avalanches below tree line. Don't overestimate the effect of tree cover. Avalanche can happen in large clearings or anywhere it's open enough to ride. So this is a couple of our forecasters at Whitewater. This is just past Catch Basin, heavily skied area. We had a storm slab problem in here, and you can see that's probably like 80 centimeter, 70 centimeter crown. Deep avalanche, very consequential in the below tree line zone. Here's another below tree line avalanche. This is our shop at Whitewater. And we call this the shop slope, or the shop slop, as it's lovingly known as. But you can see that's a small pocket below tree line, but who here would want to be kind of involved in that? Looks to me like there's probably, almost a meter of debris on the road, and if nothing else, you could end up really getting hurt, your knee or whatever, so below tree line, it's the chances are still there, and that's a significant avalanche that occurred, right by our shop. Okay, we're going to go into our danger scale. So we have North America 5 ratings. 1 through 5, 1 low, 5 extreme hazard. 1 and 5, and then high. This zone, I think people are generally pretty aware of the consequences of that zone. This zone here, moderate low. I think people understand that generally things are pretty good, and you make some good decisions, you can get out there and have a really good day. And then you get into this zone here, and middle of the road, and that's a really that's a scary place to be. That is arguably the scariest place to be, because the highest number of avalanche incidents and fatalities happen during a considerable hazard because it's hard. So I want everybody here, when you see considerable hazard on the avalanche forecast at AvCan, when you're checking it, it is the real deal, considerable. You need to have your guard up, and that is the time where you need to be making really good decisions. And if you're not feeling comfortable with things, maybe it's a good hazard to say, I'm not cool with this, we should ski something really mellow, and that's a good choice, unless you feel really confident about your decision-making skills. Human-triggered avalanches on a considerable hazard are likely. So likely avalanche hazard puts the odds in the mountain's favor, okay? During a moderate hazard, human-triggered avalanches are possible, and that puts the odds in all of our favor. So automatically, when you go touring in a moderate hazard, your odds are way better. They're way more in your favor than when you're touring in a considerable hazard. The odds that something might happen are in the mountain's favor. And that's the way I like to consider it. So again, just really highlight that considerable hazard. And one thing I want to point out is, remember, an avalanche avalanches happen in low hazard. Because you have green, we spent a number of weeks at the green brick, 111, alpine, tree line, below tree line. But that doesn't mean that avalanches aren't happening or that there isn't avalanche danger. There always is when you're traveling in the mountains. And a very tragic example is Golden was just under 111. They were low avalanche hazard when that person triggered the wind slab and lost their life. So 111 is not the total green light. Be aware of that. I want to give an example of elevation and hazard. January 4th, 2018, size 3 skier-triggered avalanche on Ecstasy Peak on Evening Ridge above Whitewater. And one person was caught and carried 250 or 300 meters, seriously injured, bilateral femur fractured, punctured lung, 5 broken ribs, major internal bleeding, and a body core temperature of 31 degrees Celsius when they got him to the hospital. Douglas Noblea, our forecasting supervisor, put an awesome presentation. I adapted and presented here. We were involved in the rescue there. This person, the rescue took several hours before we were able to have him extracted miraculously by a winch helicopter from Vernon just before dark. I mean, it was so dark when the thing came in. This is the picture of the person lowering down to us on the scene here. But Ahmad, the gentleman back in Europe, and luck is on his side, and he's actually healed enough to be back skiing a little bit in the Alps, recovering from those injuries. He reached out to us a year or so ago and, standing offer to come visit him and see him out there. Hopefully one of us can take him up on that. It was a pretty incredible thing to be a part of, and feel super grateful that he's made it out okay. Here's what I want to point out after what I'm just talking about. AvCan had the hazard as moderate in the alpine, considerable at tree line, and moderate below tree line. If that sounds unusual, it is. Generally, like I just went through the elevation bands, alpine tends to be your place where problems are significant, and usually alpine's the last. If we ever go low hazard, that's the last zone in elevation that will go low hazard. It'll be 211, 211 forever, and then finally it's like, okay, we've gained confidence in the alpine, we'll go 111. So being moderate in the alpine, considerable at tree line, this is an unusual rating, and the rating was due to a surface hoar layer that was present at tree line elevations, but not in alpine elevations, because the wind, it's so exposed, it kind of blows it down and takes care of it. So this group of 3, it's hard to see, it's the best picture I have, but the avalanche was this entire feature here. There were crowns up to, 1.5 meters, I think maybe a little bit better. This is us in the middle of the chute here. This group had checked the AvCan hazard, were experienced and prepared. But they were just recently new to the area and touring, and they weren't really familiar with the terrain. So they were educated, and the decision to ski the line was based on the fact that they thought it was much more of an alpine style feature than a tree line style feature. So they made what they, which when you look at this feature, it is exposed, and it is, you think it might behave, but that's again where it's really, really good to know your elevation band and where you're at. And AvCan here does an amazing job, trust their forecasts on that. And reinforces how important knowing your elevation and aspect are in your decision-making process, because this was a direct result of skiing into a hazard that was outside of what they thought the hazard was, because they basically thought it was more alpine than it was tree line. So I'm going to talk about kind of the first 4 avalanche problems here. But when you're on your forecast, you're going to see storm slab, wind slab, persistent slab, deep persistent slab. Not as often wet slab problems, but they do pop up. Cornice problems for sure, more in the spring. Loose wet when it warms, and loose dry. But I want to focus a little bit more, as people have asked me about the storm slab through deep persistent slab here. So storm slab, I think first and foremost, it's critical when you're traveling through the mountains to recognize when there is slab. Because if there's not slab, you're ahead of the game, generally. You know, we're dealing with the bottom problems, that's still there. But if you're reading a forecast and it says a well-settled mid and lower snowpack, and there's a storm slab problem, you can feel the storm slab problem. Typically widespread. So storm slab, just so everybody's on the same page, is when it's storming, it's snowing, it's loading, and it's building a storm slab, because it's wind can be involved, but that's not inherently a wind slab. Wind slab behaves differently. So recognizing when you're on storm slab, you can feel whooping, you can feel, those big settlements. That's generally a storm slab issue you can be feeling. And it's increased wind loading in lee features, so deeper in lee features, so with the loading of the snow falling, and some temperature that's helping things settle into a slab, and if it's a little bit warmer, it'll tend to settle into a storm slab. And the wind loading into lee features, that's what's building it. This is best managed, so when it starts snowing on Saturday and it's like pounding and whatever, the best way to manage a storm slab problem, because they do settle out, typically like a few days, a week. It's not very often a storm slab problem lasts longer than a week to 10 days. It can happen, especially if it continues to storm. But if you stay out of avalanche terrain until they settle out or stabilize, then that's your easiest way to manage a storm slab problem. And these slabs feel dense throughout, and really watch for those shooting cracks, like right from the bottom of your skis through 30 centimeters to the top, and those big whooping settlements. That's going to be really good indications that you're standing on a storm slab, and you should really start paying attention. Wind slabs, formed by wind-transported snow. I'll go back quickly. This was last year's cycle as well. Douglas took this picture of Jake Mentz, forecaster up in, this is above Catch Basin, so right above inbounds terrain, and that's a good 1.5 meter crown from storm slab, just intense loading, intense precipitation, wind, and that was enough to build a slab like that in a couple days, and things got really, really interesting for us. So wind slabs, as opposed to storm slabs, are formed by wind transporting snow. So you can form a slab from wind when it's not snowing, temperature can be cold, wind's blowing, and it's loading it into certain features. Look at this picture on the right-hand side, and so that is, you can see how it blocks up. So it will have some shooting cracks, but it tends to block more. It doesn't like shoot off and propagate the same way a storm slab does. It can. But wind slabs can form in a variety of leeward features depending on the strength of the wind. And even though that you can see that they're present, they're really hard to predict. So when you're standing out there, can everybody see, you look at the texture of this, you can see that it's like the wind has been doing a lot of damage. Like I'm sure we've all pulled up to ski resort or to go touring, and you look up and you're like, oh no, like the wind got at it. And you can tell the wind got at it. You Can't tell that with a storm slab the same way. But the areas you really need to watch for in a wind slab, and again, they feel like styrofoam and can feel really hollow beneath you, and they can be really, really quite hard. They can be like pencil hardness, you know, it feels like the table, which makes them really, really scary if you're ever caught in one, because those blocks are super dense and heavy. So in a situation like this, you could see the snow has been deposited, and then you can see some avalanches in here. You can see these crowns because it's taking all that snow and it's depositing it in here. And so where it's stripping the snow from is less likely to avalanche, but where it's depositing it to, which isn't going to look quite as messed up as that, that's where likely trigger points are going to happen. So just be aware of those points. And practice. Ask yourself, if somebody knows more than you where you're touring, you want to know what storm slab versus wind slab feels like, those are really, really important things to ask of yourself, okay? Because recognizing those, you read it in the forecast. There's a wind slab problem. There's a storm slab problem. Well, how do I recognize what is what? And that's it's a skill, and it's super critical. And then I'm going to talk about persistent and deep persistent slabs, okay? So a persistent slab is when a cohesive slab forms over persistent weak layers, such as a surface hoar facets on crust. They're slow to heal with bonding and taking weeks to months to heal sometimes. So following the forecast and knowing where they exist will help you in your decision making. So right now we have a persistent slab problem. So we have a persistent weakness. Wendy's going to talk about this. 31st of January, we had snowfall that buried a surface hoar layer. That surface hoar layer is out there. It's been reacting from time to time in certain features, producing avalanches. There was a remote triggered avalanche up on Evening Ridge, again on Third Peak, on Ecstasy, sorry. And so persistent slabs, they're under the snow. You know, you could have other things on top of you, but this persistent slab down 50 centimeters, maybe, it's below you. Impact bubble of a skier or rider, about 90 centimeters to a meter below the snow surface. So if I'm standing on the snow, or I'm skiing, I'm making a turn, maybe my impact bubble is a little bigger than some other people's, but you know, like that's about how far we're going into the snow. You stand at a regroup that's in the wrong spot, and we have 8 of us that are standing in the same spot. Our impact bubble increases significantly on how we're able to affect those lower layers by standing on them. So persistent slabs are those slabs that are present, we're tracking, we know they're there, maybe they're reacting, maybe they're not reacting, but following the forecast to know where they are, knowing their aspect, knowing their elevation, the style of terrain that they're in is going to make a big difference for you when you're trying to manage a problem like that. Deep persistent slabs involve the old persistent weak layers buried deep in the snowpack. These things can last a whole season. Examples of that are facets on a crust. Rains in November, like it typically does, and then you get these big square facets, feel like sugar on top of that crust, and can be a real problem. That's what this avalanche, Evening Ridge, failed on. This, it's hard to see. I dug a fracture line profile on this. There was 92 centimeters of snow here. This picture is basically, it almost goes right into this. This was a 2-meter crown that was right beside us where we were digging. So we went from 92 centimeters of snow to 2 meters of snow. And this was significant. This was a size 2.5 avalanche, and you know, injured a few people, and it was, we feel, again, grateful that we were able to help on that situation, and they made it out. But a persistent slab problem, we move into something that we call low probability, high consequence. So triggering it might not be the easiest thing in the world, but if you do, get out of the way, because you could be going for 2.5 meters of snow with you. You know, they're deep in the snowpack, and that's a real problem. Currently, we feel lucky that we do not have a deep, persistent problem. We have a persistent slab, surface hoar. We have a melt freeze crust with some facets on it, more on the solar aspects, like Wendy will talk about. But I think the real thing to manage these is you got to practice patience, and they're going to be with you for a season. You know, when these problems are present, you just have to think, you know, maybe it's not the time to ski the dream line. You know, it's not the low where you want to gain some confidence and feel good about things. You have to adjust your mindset and choosing terrain. Terrain is always your friend. You know, you can make terrain work in your favor if you choose the right terrain. So, how's everybody doing? Woo! Okay. So again, I want to reiterate this. Know if there's slab. If there's slab present, your mindset changes, because you have to think about things different. So as you're traveling, you know, be looking for those signs of whether it's wind slab or storm slab. When there's slab, pay attention, okay? Regardless of the problem, avalanche activity. So if you see avalanches, please, 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 please take note that avalanches are happening, and note their aspect, note their elevation, because that is the best indicator of whether a slope that you might be going to ski or ride is safe or not. And always be aware of other signs of instability. Again, the shooting cracks, the whooping. It's valuable information that slab properties are present, and you need to be aware, because it's going to help you make your decisions for the day. If you're, and sometimes it's not expected, and if you start feeling it, it makes a big difference. Okay, some terrain and travel advice. Understanding terrain it's super nuanced and it's really complex. You know, like terrain, what's happening underneath you with all that snow on top can be really daunting, especially if you're showing up to a new area. So that's where paying attention to your elevation bands and your aspect to know what's typically there can be on your side as well. Obvious terrain features, ridges and gullies, broad open areas. Higher ground is generally safer because the shape of the terrain, if you're on a ridge, the avalanche tends to run away from you. Not always like that, but higher ground, wider ground tends to be safer than obviously being in a gully or kind of, loaded areas. So paying attention to the shape of the terrain. Something, if you're going to an area, if you're curious, like touring someplace at Whitewater, we've got amazing tools now to our disposal, Google Earth. You can actually zoom in and have a look at what the terrain looks like in the summer with no snow on it, and that can make a significant difference in knowing if there's anchors on the slope, if there's not, and how you can approach that, right? Somebody asked me this question. It was kind of the primary thing that got me thinking about this topic tonight that I'm talking about, is how you recognize a thin to thick snowpack area. So we talk a lot, you might see this on AvCan's forecast about, avoid areas that are thin to thick. And so it seems straightforward, right? You avoid the areas that are thin to thick. Well, how do you know if it's a thin to thick area? Because it's a critical piece of information. You don't want to trigger a slab that's 1.5 meters down below you, but how do you recognize that area is got 40 centimeters of snow there and has 2 meters of snow there. So remember that the impact bubble I was talking about can affect deeper layers. So I can affect 40 centimeters or 50 centimeters of snow below me that all of a sudden becomes 2 meters of snow there. That's how I trigger a deep, persistent slab problem. That's the way. You're not going to impact it from 2.5 meters straight down on a deep snowpack. You're going to trigger it when you're too close, you're thin, and then it propagates into that deep layer, and all of a sudden you've got a real problem when it's 200 meters wide and a size 3. So remember, leeward areas just below ridgetop. So where the wind is like stripping the snow and it's loading it lower down in the snowpack. Solar and windward cross-loaded areas. So if you're on a solar, like it can be, like it's places where the snowpack's going to be shallow. If you see rocks near the surface, it's a visual clue that near a rock, if the rock's at the top, the rock goes all the way to the ground, it can be a shallow snowpack area, right? So paying attention to that. But when you're high in the tree line, you're in the alpine, those are typical places. The wind's stripping it, it's loading it a little bit farther down slope. You see some rocks and things of that nature. Look at this picture here. Look at this rock band. This is where I dug that profile. This is the 2-meter crown. We dug the profile just right over here. But look how thin this is here. It's super variable because this is a super funky aspect. It gets cross-loaded by the wind. It gets stripped away from the rocks, gets deposited. It's thin to thick. It's shallow snowpack to deep snowpack, and those are generally, not even when there's a deep persistent slab problem, those are generally really, really good areas to avoid because it's just, you're that much closer to those deeper layers and to problems. Another point, take out your probe. How much snow is below me? We all have this wonderful tool in our bag that isn't just for finding somebody under the surface. You get a lot of information by taking out the probe. Take out the probe. Know if you're standing on 50 centimeters of snow. Am I standing on 50 or am I standing on 1.50 meters? All of a sudden I pull it out, I'm like, oh, there's more snow here than I thought. It can really increase my confidence on what's below me and how good I feel about maybe triggering something that's a little bit deeper. So that's a really useful tool that we all carry with us all the time. Take it out of your bag and use it. It makes a really big difference. And I'm going to give us just a few different things on weather to think about. We get a weather forecast. You read the Avcan forecast. We've got a million different resources. But when you're looking at it, think that forecasters, computer models, not always right. So there's really critical things as you're traveling through the mountains you need to watch for. And any form of rapid change, temperature, snowfall, or wind. If you're out there, things are changing in a serious way, pay attention. Because the snowpack is changing too, and it can be loading and definitely causing significant problems, whatever it's loading on top of. But any rapid change is not good. Sun on the snow surface destabilizes the snowpack super fast. So you're out there touring, all of a sudden, it can happen. It happened this year even in December, January. You think, oh, well, it's January, the solar's not going to be that strong. It can make an effect and it can destabilize the snow surface. So if you start feeling sun on your face, you're warming up, you're getting hot, pay attention, please. If it starts raining, and I shouldn't have said that word, but rain adds weight to the snowpack like nothing else. You can add 4 or 5 millimeters of rain and things are going to go sideways in a hurry. So if the weather changes suddenly and temperatures go up and you start feeling it, really pay attention. And don't underestimate strong winds. They can load features so fast that You'll be skiing, you'll be coming out after an hour and a half lap, you'll get to the top, you're about to drop in again, and all of a sudden, you're dealing with a wind slab problem that wasn't there 2 hours ago. It can happen, and it can catch you really off guard. So if you feel winds pick up, or you're getting to the ridge, and all of a sudden it's starting to blow, pay attention, because try to look for clues like ripples on the snow surface, whatever, that tells you that the wind's been blowing maybe up high a little bit longer at upper tree line or alpine than it has maybe if you skied down into below tree line elevation. And again, reiterate, weather forecasts, they're not always accurate, so be prepared to pay attention to those clues when they happen. I borrowed a lot of things from a really awesome website called avalanche.ca. They have this tab here, Learn. You click that, and you have all this amazing information that was put together by professionals for free for you. If you've taken an AST1, make sure you're signed up for one if you haven't, if you're going to go into the backcountry. But if you have, if you've taken an AST2, you can come in here. I went through a bunch of this Avi Savvy, and it's excellent. It gives you all kinds of tutorials, quizzes. It's such a good learning tool. So just be aware that that is available to us for free all the time. Avalanche Canada does an unreal job, and we're very, very lucky in Canada to have them. You know, like I think that it's turned into something that's really great. So that tool, click next time you're there, take 15 minutes, cruise through Avi Savvy, you know, read some of these things. It's really, really good learnables, and I think it's an amazing resource for everybody. So thank you, and does anybody have any questions, or here we go. Yes, because a wind slab is going to be specific to the features where the wind has loaded the snow, versus a storm slab expect to be everywhere. So I would manage a wind slab in that I would still choose safe terrain, but I would really avoid areas on the lee side of areas where wind has come from. And with a storm slab, if I start identifying that, I'm feeling whooping, I'm feeling shooting cracks, I'm going to pick my safest line and really not try to venture into any avalanche terrain. And thanks for asking a question. Anybody else, now that you see that you get a hat? Hello. Yeah, you're going to find that in general, our prevailing wind, the question is tips for identifying wind direction. So know before you go, you should be able to find out where prevailing winds generally come from. So look, cornices are massive indicators. Cornices don't form on windward side of features, they form on leeward side of features. So if you can see up high into the alpine and you see where cornices have formed, that's a good indication of where your prevailing winds are coming from. When you're up in the mountains, you can see lots of times when the wind's blowing, you get these little pointed features on the snow surface, and the pointed features they actually point into the wind. So it strips away, there's firm pieces of snow, and they can blow. So look for little points, and look for little features of loading. You know, like look for where the snow has been taken from and loaded on. You'll get like even little cornice formation. It's not even that big, but in a storm, because we can get, you can get southeast, southwest. It's really, really important. So a rock that could be this big, you can have little cornice features that are forming on the other side of rocks and things like that. And that's very, very good indication that the wind was coming from that direction, loading it. If it was coming from southwest, it's loading it onto a northeast, and you'll get these little cornice features that are building up. So, and here you go. You can come get your hat. You're welcome. Anybody else? Go ahead. Yeah. That's not one I'm super familiar with. Do you? Yeah. Okay, there you go. Yeah, so if you go onto AvCan there, you'll definitely be able to find that info. Just click on the weather station. Go ahead in the back. It depends on the persistent slab problem. So maybe we're dealing with facets on a crust that exist on a solar aspect. Maybe we're dealing with a surface hoar problem that exists on north, west, and east aspects that doesn't exist on solars because the sun got at it. So it's going to be regionally, there have been, yes. We had one in Catuttle, we had the one on Evening Ridge, there was one in 5 Mile, and they are popping up sporadically in different areas, but it hasn't been a significant problem in the fact that it's not, occurring very regularly. But Wendy will talk to us about, I think that is maybe subject to change, just given the fact that we're about to go into a pretty significant storm cycle. So, here you go. Hello. Hi, Myrna. Oh, here you go. Yeah. It was discontinued because of its irregular use. And I think it was causing more uncertainty and problems than it was tending to help as things move forward. So, we did used to have a sign-out sheet for the backcountry, so if there was a problem, we could always check. I think now that your best option is always let somebody know where it is you're going. Have a trip plan. I mean, that's really, really important, and let people know that there's, where you're at. So if you go missing, then we can make sure we know where to find you. God. Got a whole bag of things here, but there you go. All right. Okay, well, I think we can go to intermission. Thank you all very much, and I really hope that the flow of this, like when we go into the Snowpack presentation, makes you think about certain things. And like I say, we're always available at Whitewater. There's a whole bunch of resources, but come ask us some questions. Thanks.
You figure out everyone's winging it. My high school reunion is coming up. I'm mad I don't even have time.
So, again, think about some of the things I was just talking about. And we're going to go through the Snowpack update. Wendy Lewis, Avalanche forecaster for Whitewater and for AvCan. And she's going to take us through what we're seeing right now and what we can expect to see kind of in the next little while. So, Wendy, let's do it. Awesome.
All right, guys, how's the volume there? Okay, cool. Let me know if I get a bit quiet. We can go closer. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for coming and sticking around. I know this is a lot of information. We'll try not to overload you, but I really believe knowledge is power, and we're giving you the tools to make the best decisions in the backcountry. So it's really cool to see this many people sticking around for these kind of events and month after month coming out. Who was here last month? Solid 5 people. All right. That's fine. I'm not offended. So I did the presentation last month. Since then, we've had some pretty epic touring conditions. Like Jay said, it was 3 times low for like a solid 2.5 weeks, which kind of sucks from a skiing perspective, but it really was a good time to head into those bigger objectives, and we like to be able to tell you when it is a good time, right? It's not always conservative terrain. It's not always your guard is up, that kind of thing. So it's really cool to see people doing that at the appropriate time. We are halfway through the winter, according to Whitewater's operations anyway. If you ski tour into June, it's like probably a third of the way in. But it's about halfway for us, so that's pretty sweet. We show you this graph every month or so, so you hopefully are used to seeing this. This is our Snowpack average compared to past seasons. It's just nice to kind of see where we're at. It's a bit of a reference point, but remember, anything can happen. So we are the blue line, red arrow pointing at it to highlight it. We are here kind of thing, X on the map. The green line is last season. So you can see we've, it's a bit on and off, right? We've got some steep climbs there, and this is our snow water equivalence. This is how much snow or rain we've had. So there's some steep climbs there, some storms, some kind of plateaus, and we're in one of those right now. Overall, we're kind of just below average, but like we saw last year, anything can happen. So take this with a bit of a grain of salt. It's nice to kind of see where we are in comparison to other years. And there's not a huge difference in snowpack height or the amount of snow that we've had since I last stood right here in front of you. But there is quite a big difference in terms of our layers of concern. So we'll dive into that tonight, or now. Let's do it now. So this is the same graph, just kind of cropped a little bit here. So October, November, early season started off pretty typical for us here in Nelson. We had a lot of snow. We had a big warming event that formed a melt freeze crust, totally normal for us. December started off dry and warm though, surface hoar and a crust. But we had consistent snowfall after that, and you can really see that on the graph, right? November, big spike, bit of a plateau, and then a big climb towards the end of December into January. We did have a freezing rain event, December 26th, Boxing Day. If you were out skiing anywhere around here on that day, you will remember that. It was pretty significant. But overall, December was pretty snowy, and that was really good to see. January, though, dry and cold. That's that big plateau there, which is a bit sad to see. We had another surface hoar and crust layer form. We also had some strong easterly winds, and those are really typical of Arctic outbreaks, Arctic outflows, whatever you want to call it, where that wind is coming down from the north or east. So that's pretty typical for us. We had a big storm at the end of January, early February, about 50 centimeters of snow at Whitewater, so the taps kind of turned back on then. But the rest of February up until today has really been a repeat. Dry and cold, we had more surface hoar form, and then more easterly winds. That's kind of been the theme of the season, and something I've mentioned several times here, like a storm and then a drought, a climb on the graph there and then a plateau, storm and then a drought. So what does that mean for us? What is a drought? It's the same as in summer, where we don't have much rainfall or very little. Same in winter, very little or no snowfall. What does that mean for the snowpack? Well, as forecasters, we like to look on a crystal level. We like to nerd out about that sort of stuff, so we can do that a little bit right now. And we have a variety of weak layers that the droughts form. So we have surface hoar that forms on shaded and sheltered aspects, or it'd be more correct to say it's preserved on shaded and sheltered aspects. So surface hoar forms on cold and clear nights when we have a really strong temperature gradient at the surface of the snow. And then wind destroys it, rain destroys it, that kind of thing. So we see it preserved on north-facing slopes, sheltered from the wind. And the big thing with surface hoar in that bottom picture there, I talked about it a bit last month, is that when it's preserved, it's standing upright. And it's perfectly preserved with all of this airspace around it. So it's not letting the new snow bond with the old. It's preventing that. And big air spaces in the snowpack like that, big surface hoar layers, can propagate fractures really long distances. And it's like dominoes in the snowpack, right? One falls and they all want to go. Crusts are pretty straightforward. Typically, up until this point in the season, we hope to see them only on solar aspects, so where the sun is melting the snow and it's refreezing. And it makes sense, right? Smooth crust, it's kind of a bummer. We also do see them when we have rain. I wasn't the first person to mention it tonight, so it's okay to say it now. And then we also have facets. So it's a little bit blurry over this side, but facets form when crusts are buried, so above and below a crust, and they are weak angular crystals. They don't like to bond with their neighbors. It's like sugar in the snowpack. We can also see them when we have long periods of cold weather in the surface snow. We call that near surface faceting. And again, it just turns to sugar. It has no cohesion. It doesn't make a good snowball. It's not good for much. It's fun when you ski it on the surface, but we don't like it when it gets buried. So all of these drought layers are our persistent weak layers. These form our persistent slab problems. They tend to linger in the snowpack once they're buried. They kind of resist that bonding. So we don't like to see them too much. This year, we've had them several times over, so it's worth kind of covering these words that we use a lot. And long droughts like we've had this year, these layers tend to become worse. They have longer to form. That surface hoar has a chance to become much, much bigger. That's a pretty big one right there that I took a picture of the other day. Facets as well become well developed. So our notable layers right now look something like this. These are just the ones that we're tracking. These are the ones we're concerned about. So these are the ones we want to tell you about. So we'll start with the early December surface hoar, crust, and facets. This is mostly a problem north of Nelson. We talked about this last time that I was standing here. We had a freezing rain event when the storm came in to bury this layer. So around Nelson, that surface hoar was destroyed and kind of embedded in that crust, and that was actually good for us. Further north, as close as Caslow, that didn't happen, so the surface hoar is large and preserved up there. Hasn't been an issue in a while, but it might come back, so we're leaving it on the radar here. Since then, we've got the January 31st surface hoar, crust and facets. And so that was buried right at the end of the month when we had our snow come back. That 50 centimeter storm buried all of that formed during that drought. We haven't seen too much on this layer because it's pretty shallowly buried. We've only had a little bit of snow in February, so we haven't really seen the full potential of this layer. We saw a few avalanches when it was first buried. I'll show some of those later. But we don't really know the full potential of it. We don't really have a slab of snow, like Jay talked about, sitting above that yet. And then we have the Feb 14th surface hoar, Valentine's Day surface hoar. Same thing, it's only sort of 10 to 15 below the surface of the snow, so we don't know what it can do yet. It's not yet become an interface of concern. So snow profile for you to have a look at. Again, I showed this last time. So we have depth along the right-hand side there, starting 0 at the top. Sadly, this profile was only 170 centimeters deep. I thought I was mistaken when I graphed this up, but I wasn't. And on the x-axis, it's showing you the density of the layer, or the hardness of the layer. Yeah, thanks. So harder layers like the crusts, you can see these two lower crusts right here, this one and that one, extend further over to the right-hand side. They're denser, they're harder, they've got more resistance to them, whereas softer layers sitting at the top are further towards me. Okay? So this is what we see when we dig, we graph it up. This is what we're looking at all the time. And we've identified in this profile, taken at the summit plot at Whitewater, where we take our weather from, our major layers of concern. So our February 14th surface hoar, again, super shallow. And you can see it has really low density snow sitting on top of it. It doesn't have that slab. A little bit further down, January 31st, surface hoar. In this location, because it's a northerly aspect, it's surface hoar in its facets. If we had dug on Goat Slide, somewhere that's sunny, south facing, we would see crust and facets instead. So that's sitting 50 to 60 centimeters deep. The Boxing Day freezing rain, I just pointed this out because it is kind of a major layer in the snowpack. We haven't seen an issue on this layer in quite a while. Oops, sorry. And then the early December surface hoar crust and facets. So again, not so much an issue immediately around Nelson, but further north. So we dig these profiles to see what's going on in the snow, to test the bond between the layers, to see how things are changing. This plot we dig in once every maybe 2 weeks. We want to see how things are evolving. We want to see how things are bonding, whether there's hard layers over soft layers, whether bonds are improving or weakening. And we get an idea of stability. We don't get an answer, but we get an idea. So what do I see here, and what do I want you guys to see? So overall, it's more consolidated as we move to the bottom of the snowpack. It starts off quite soft, low density at the top, and it gradually moves to more dense, consolidated snowpack. So you can kind of see why we don't currently have any issues lower in the snowpack here. We can also see how soft our surface hoar layers are, and that once we get a harder or denser cohesive slab above them, how they might become an issue. So let's jump to the AvCan danger ratings now. So this was published today, 4 p.m. for the next few days. So moderate at all elevations, and like Jay said, moderate human-triggered avalanches are possible. And moderate danger is really about identifying the specific features of concern. It's not widespread issues. It's not high danger where it's like, hey, stay out of avalanche terrain. That's your best bet. This is plan your trip accordingly. Pick your features. And we can see that Friday is the same danger, and then Saturday is increasing. We can't see any further than that. We only forecast 3 days out. But we know that danger is rising into the weekend. Problem number one, lucky number one, is our persistent slab problem. AvCan's currently rating it as all elevations, all aspects. So there's no trick there. There's no thing to note. You should be aware of this wherever you're traveling. They're saying that avalanches triggered by humans are possible, and to expect them up to size 2. So that's a large enough avalanche to mess you up a bit. At this point in time, we're only talking about the surface hoar. The comments in these problems are really important. So they're only talking about surface hoar. They're not currently talking about the crust. So that says to me we haven't had any avalanches on that south-facing slope yet. That maybe it's not a concern there. We've only seen evidence that it's a problem on north-facing slopes where the surface hoar might be preserved. And again, we come back to where a cohesive slab sits above it. So in areas where you encounter really low density Surface snow, not so much a problem. Maybe areas where they've had more snow and it's settled into a cohesive slab, or maybe areas that you've seen wind. That's what I'd be worried about when I'm reading this. Problem number 2, dry loose. We don't tend to see these in the Avalanche Canada forecast that often. It's kind of rare that it's a problem. So dry loose avalanches, we're seeing this in our forecast at the moment because we've had that surface faceting I mentioned before. So we've had cold and clear weather for a long time, right? That surface snow is losing cohesion. So they're talking about them gathering more snow as they move downhill and becoming larger than expected. So this is your slough kind of getting out of control, where you're skiing across a slope, you're doing a couple of turns, you think you're managing your slough, and then all of a sudden you're like, whoa, this is gathering a lot more mass than I expected. And they're specifying steep terrain. It has the same likelihood of triggering as the persistent slab, but a smaller expected size. And again, this is just what we're expecting to see. Terrain and travel advice. These obviously link to our problems, and these are the real sort of take-home pieces or take out into the field pieces when you guys are traveling around. This is what AvCan wants you to think about when you're planning your trip and when you're traveling. So your approach steep and open slopes at and below tree line cautiously. So this is where surface hoar is often preserved. Alpine areas tend to have more wind. We talked about that earlier. But we tend to see surface hoar preserved more at tree line and below, where wind is less of an issue. So cautious there. Watch for signs of instability. So these are really big ones, and this is always something I'm looking out for when I'm traveling in the backcountry. Signs of instability are your red flags. They're what I call free advice from the Snowpack, that maybe you need to change your trip plan. Because what they're telling you is that triggering is likely, that it's kind of primed for triggering. So recent avalanches are the best predictor of future avalanches. Whumping, hollow sounds, shooting cracks. Jay talked about all of those. So if you're seeing these things while you're traveling, we're starting to worry about a slab, because we can't have shooting cracks in low density, loose snow. So I'm worrying about that persistent slab, and I'm going, okay, this is my warning sign to step back, reevaluate, maybe change my plan. And then loose avalanches may step down to deeper layers. So this is something we see a bit when we have several weak layers within a snowpack. Smaller avalanches can trigger larger avalanches. We get into the details. The Avalanche Canada forecast has a lot to it. The further down, the further you scroll, the more information there is for you. I encourage you guys to read it all, even if you don't understand it all. The more you read it, the more you will understand it, the more you get used to the language. There is also a great glossary for any terms that you don't understand. So for the avalanche summary, what I'm looking for here when I read this is the details, right? I want to know where, I want to know how big, and I want to know what kind. So for this one, dry loose, size 1 to 1.5, and steep terrain. We talked earlier about aspect and elevation, but this avalanche problem is not limited to an aspect and an elevation, right? So it's more a terrain feature. That's the specific terrain that I would be looking to avoid or minimize my exposure to when I'm reading this avalanche forecast. And then for our persistent slab, a size 1.5 naturally triggered slab was reported on a north aspect in the Alpine. So I just told you that surface hoar is often preserved more at tree line on north aspects. So this is a little unusual to me. But it says again that north-facing slopes are more of a concern. You might be able to find that layer at all elevations on all aspects, but north-facing slopes in the Alpine is where we've seen activity on this layer recently. So it's really important to kind of read through these details, tuck these nuggets away in your brain when you go out in the backcountry. More information. They also mention wind slabs here, but wind slabs are not part of the forecast. They're not a problem that's listed. So that says to me that they've occurred, but Avalanche Canada has said, hey, they're not an ongoing problem. They're not the predominant problem in your area, that kind of thing. And that may be because they're explosive triggered, or it may be that those are bonding and they're becoming less of a concern. And then we go into the Snowpack summary. It's basically what I showed you before in graph, but just word forms. So we're talking about up to 20 centimeters of snow sitting on a surface hoar layer from the middle of February. That's our February 14th surface hoar. And in some areas, it's a thin sun crust on steep south-facing slopes. So it depends where you are. It depends what aspect you're on. And then below that, another 20 to 60 centimeters of surface hoar buried in late January. So this is our January 31st interface, right? So we're kind of landmarking our snowpack. And if you were to dig, this is what you would find. This is what you're expected to find. And again, they're reminding us it's most reactive where a slab has formed above this layer. So we're going back to that slab properties are key there, right? They're linking to the avalanche problem, they're linking to the potential. And if I jump back just a little bit here, persistent slab is listed as our first problem. It's a larger size than our dry loose, but also slab avalanches tend to catch people out more than dry loose or wet loose, right? Loose avalanches start from a point and they build from there. Slabs, you can be in the middle of it when it triggers above you, right? They propagate widely. So people get caught out much more by slab avalanches. And Avalanche Canada will always deliver the main problem first, right? The one they want you to remember. So we're ordering them in priority. Confidence statement. So here's where the AvCan forecaster is telling you what they're confident about or what their uncertainty is. So maybe what the limitations of their forecast are, what's reducing their confidence. And right now it's persistent weak layers. That's pretty straightforward, right? They're challenging for us to forecast, and right now we kind of don't know how this layer is going to react. We're really not sure because it hasn't been tested yet. We don't have that slab over it. We can dig all the profiles we like. We can stare at the crystals as long as we like, but we just don't know because we don't have that slab sitting over it. We don't have enough information yet. A couple of recent avalanches for you. We haven't had a significant avalanche cycle since a month ago, which is a bit sad to say, because we also haven't had a whole lot of snow. So this was January 31st crust. This was the day after it was buried. And this was an explosive trigger. This is Goat Slide, for anyone who's familiar with that, our new inbound zone at Whitewater. So an explosive, yeah, a large trigger, but still, it was able to produce this. That's a really wide propagating crown. And this is a southwest facing slope at about 2,000 meters. So it's good to kind of see the potential of the slopes we maybe ski frequently, even inbounds. This one ran over the boundary line, which is something we weren't expecting either. So this was the day after it was buried. It was super reactive. I'm not saying that we get a bit more snow on this layer and this happens naturally, but we just don't know. We're looking at potential. We also had, like I said before, some really strong easterly winds. And we saw some really rapid loading during that time. Like Jay mentioned earlier, conditions change really, really quickly. And the snowpack does not like rapid change. So rapid snowfall, rapid wind loading, temperature change, rain, I had to say it. It doesn't like rapid change. It doesn't deal well with that. So rapid wind loading, especially strong winds, tend to load lower into the slope, right? Moderate winds, light winds, we tend to see loading around ridgelines. So it's, as soon as that wind kind of loses its speed, it drops all the snow that it's carrying. But with stronger winds, it carries it much further. So for anyone who's familiar, this is just below West Waima. So you come through West Weimar, you ski a couple of really nice turns in the fans there, and it's that next roll. It's kind of an odd angle. But this was a skier accidental on February 4th. And again, really rapid loading, so conditions were changing really, really quickly. So what's coming next? This is our forecast. It's looking good in terms of snowfall amounts, which is really nice. It's nice to see snow back in the forecast for once. It's been a bit of a strange season like that. But we're seeing mild temperatures, we're seeing snowfall. So those layers that are buried, barely, in the upper snowpack are going to become pretty reactive, I think. They're going to get tested for the first time. We haven't kind of seen their full potential. But we know they don't usually react very well to load. We know that they don't usually really react, very well to rapid change. Jay talked briefly about millimeters in the snow. When we have cold conditions, our sort of 2 millimeters, let's say for example there, can give us quite a lot more snow. If it's warm, we might get less, but that 2 mils stays the same. So we measure our snowpack in millimeters. We measure our load in millimeters because that's a known quantity. And if this doesn't make any sense to you, if it looks like a Bob Ross painting of the happy little trees, that's fine. Don't worry about it. If this does make sense to you and you look at Wendy, you look at spot weather, that's great. This is what we look at as an avalanche forecaster. We're looking at the amount of mils coming in. We're looking at several days of loading here. And we saw that before on the previous screen of, 6 centimeters, 12 centimeters, 13 centimeters. So we're seeing progressive loading here. We're also in the top Bob Ross section. This is the temperature of the air combined with the moisture content. That's the green, the happy little trees. And we're seeing conditions warm. So that is above 0, which is sad. But it might happen. So we're seeing not only a reasonable amount of snow, that load, but we're seeing warmth. So we're thinking maybe some of the R word, maybe not. But the snowpack again doesn't like rapid change. We've been sitting at -18, -10. Today we rose to a whopping -5, guys. And then if we're going to rise again, okay, maybe those persistent weak layers are going to become more reactive. And then we're combining that with new snow. We're combining that with a new load. We're also seeing in this a lot of wind, which is picked out here for you on this bottom one. Again, you don't need to understand it. I can just tell you there's a lot of wind in that, which again is stressing that snowpack, right? This is a solid, warm, wet, windy storm. We see them here in Nelson all the time. This is not entirely unusual. But things are made trickier with those persistent weak layers. We're kind of painting the picture of what we expect to see as we move forward into the storm, into the weekend. So brief plug for the men. I'll always plug the men, the Mountain Information Network. If you have any information about avalanches, but that also goes for weather, snowpack, if you're out traveling, please submit to the men. We really, really appreciate it. We seriously read every one. They help us to hone the forecast and kind of dial in the local conditions. You guys are really great information seekers for us, so we want to use that. See something, say something. So even if you didn't see any avalanches, we want to know. If the writing was good, we want to know. If it was terrible, I'm sorry, but we'd love to know that too. It really helps us to know if we're on track or if we need to refine things. Maybe we forecast 20 centimeters and you saw 0. Maybe we forecast 20 and you saw 40. Tell us about it. We love your men reports so much. The final thing, I'll leave you with a couple of takeaways. Storm's coming. So storm snow is always going to introduce instability into the snowpack, right? Snow from the sky is trying to bond with snow on the surface. Totally two different things. So we're expecting danger ratings to rise. We saw the Avalanche Canada forecast outlook is considerable. I would not be surprised if we see it go to high on Sunday either. With that amount of snow, that amount of warmth, we're expecting reactive conditions. And everything is made more complex and more uncertain with our persistent weak layers. We kind of don't know what's going to happen. We're expecting them to be reactive. We know that that new snow is going to add load and going to add stress along with that temperature change. So we're expecting things to become reactive. And whenever we have uncertainty, whenever we have low confidence, we always say step back into conservative terrain. It's something we talk about a lot, but Jay mentioned it, terrain is always the answer. Terrain is always your friend, right? So if you're seeing those signs of instability, if you're seeing things that don't line up with the forecast, because weather models are inaccurate, step back into conservative terrain. It's your best bet. And finally, we have snow in the forecast again, so how good's that? We're pretty excited. Yeah. That's all I have. I think we have a raffle now. I mean, the bottom line is let's wait and see what happens with the snow, so. Yeah, sure. So the question we have is, are we controlling above goat slide out of bounds? It's a really good question. I think we should probably give him a hat or something. So yes and no. The answer forecasters will give you a lot of the time is it depends, and it does depend. So we are controlling inbounds terrain, absolutely. We also do control out of bounds terrain that will affect inbounds terrain as necessary. So when we have a significant amount of storm snow or buried persistent weak layers that we might see, that I might have just talked about, we will look at whether we need to. So if we're expecting natural human-triggered avalanches that might run into our boundary and affect the skiers within our boundary, then we might control that area, yeah. So you might see us out there in the backcountry doing control work. It's still the backcountry. We're not out there all the time, so it's important to remember that too. Cool. Thanks for asking.
I can't see. Okay, raffle. First thing we're going to raffle off is day ticket to Whitewater. That's pretty awesome. So, let's see how this works. It's spinning. Jeffrey Boyd. Free day ticket to Whitewater. Awesome. Cool. Custom set of footbeds from Jerix. Very, very awesome. If you don't have custom footbeds, you should get them. Maybe you're going to win some. Here we go. David Salisbury. You here? Yahoo! Way to go, David. I'm sure you can make it work with them. Next, we're going to do the ultralight fanny pack. Great for all your adventures. Antoine Thibault. Yeah! Rock it with pride. Cheers. And another another day pass to Whitewater. Callow O'Riordan. You here? Yeah. Awesome win. There you go. Oh, you get a State of the Snowpack sticker too. Okay, and people who entered, remember if you've entered every single one of our State of the Snowpack, that'll include the one that's coming up March 5th here at the Royal. We have 3 prizes. We have a set of skis from Jerix. We have 2-night stay at the off season is a grand prize at White Grizzly, and we have this awesome backpack made by the ultralight, same as the fanny pack, like super well crafted bag. So love to see you out here on the 5th. Keep entering. Thank you so much for the support. We really appreciate it, and yeah, we'll see you again soon. It's always a pleasure.